Welcome, everyone, to the Deep Valley Book Festival Keynote Author Talk with Minnesota author Margi Preus. We're happy to have Margi here really through the weekend to talk about writing and the writing process and all of that good stuff. So we're happy to have her join us for this Cabin Fever edition of the book festival. I'll just give a few words about Margi if you're not familiar with her work. Margi is a New York Times bestselling author of the Newbery Honor book, Heart of a Samurai, and other notable novels and picture books for young readers. New in 2020 are Village of Scoundrels, The Littlest Voyager, and The Silver Box, part of the Enchantment Lake mystery series. Her books have won multiple awards. They have been honored as ALA, ALSC Notables, selected as an NPR Backseat Book Club pick, chosen for community reads, and translated into many languages. When not writing, Margi enjoys traveling, speaking, and visiting schools all over the world. So thank you for being with us today, Margi. We're really happy to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, I would imagine in the past few months, though, the traveling, the speaking to schools all over the world has looked a little different, right?
It's kind of like this, actually.
Yes.
Although I think that teachers are having, enough for a hard time just keeping it together to arrange a whole lot of school visits right now, and that's completely understandable. So, but I get to pop in now and then.
Yeah, that's good. Just a little bit more time maybe for being at home and for writing, right?
It's true. It's done wonders for my routine,
Okay.
which I've never really had before.
Yes.
So it's kind of good to actually sort of settle into, now I know, like when writers say, well, I work from 8 to noon and then I eat an omelet and then I, go for a walk and stuff. And I was like, how do they do that? But now I'm starting to understand it. Just stay home all the time.
Yes, you kind of have no choice but to get into a routine.
Right.
Actually, that's a great place to start. That was one of the questions I wanted to ask you anyway, because I think readers or people who want to write, who are interested in writing, they're really interested in knowing that, from authors. I think everyone, I could speak for myself that I'm always maybe hoping there's some magic trick that, nobody told me about yet. And maybe Margi's the one who will now have this magic trick of how it really can work successfully. But yeah, so just tell a little bit more about your routine and maybe give a little bit more comparison. You said you didn't really have one before. I mean, what did it look like before you had all of these months at home, and then now what does it look like?
It does. It is different. And I think that what I have mostly relied on in writing is to get so engaged in a story that the compulsion to work on it is so great that I'll do it wherever, whenever. And rather than having a routine where I sit down and this is my time and so on. I've had that in fits and starts in my life, but I don't know, things happen in life. And I know everyone's aware of this, it's like, how do you get a regular routine? That was really hard for me. So now that I have one, well, sort of, I do appreciate it. I mean, it's great, but I still need to have that engagement with the story to really be able to focus for long periods of time on it. And I feel like it's interesting that you said magic, because I was just thinking the same thing. I've been thinking about process a lot because people always ask, what's your process? And I think, why do they want to know that I write on a piece of paper with a pen and then I type it up and it's like, whatever, but I think it's exactly what you're saying, is that when does the magic happen? And for me, I've been thinking about that. when does the magic happen? And it happens usually after a lot of horrible grunt work that feels just stupid and worthless and crappy. And, just writing, just giving yourself permission. Don't judge yourself. Just start writing stuff. And eventually something goes click, or it doesn't. But, when the magic happens, something clicks and it's like, oh, and then you're in. It's like a little magic key into the secret doorway. And I have to do that almost every single day, is get through the junk to get to the little door where I can put the magic key. The other thing that I do that's kind of weird is, so I write on a piece of paper with pen on notebooks. And for me, that's part of getting there. It's easier for me to get there doing that than doing this. And for a long time, I felt like, what a waste of time, because I write it out, I print it up, then I type it up, then I print it out, then I write on it some more. It seemed very time consuming. So one time I thought, okay, I'm just going to just use a computer. Why not? It'll be faster. But it wasn't, because it was just only dumb stuff and no good stuff. But I have found that once I'm sort of in, if I type and look out the window at the same time. So here's another thing you could try. And don't pay any attention to what's on the screen. Don't read it. Don't look at it. Just, it's sort of it gives the same thing, like that permission to go and permission to not, and then you don't see your mistakes and you don't see all the typos, and you don't start judging, like, I don't need that line, I'll cross that off, because you got to let your mind just go and give it some free rein. It's like a horse, if you want it to run, you got to give it some slack.
Sure.
So I guess those are my little tips, as weird as they are. But that for me is it. And then the other thing, a lot of times I've heard writers say, well, I go for a long walk and I get all my good ideas then. And that happens to me too, but I think it happens after I've been doing the hard work for a long time. So I've been sitting at my desk, I've been sitting with my pen and my paper or on my computer typing, and doing that for a long enough time that then when I get up and go for a walk, the juices are already going and the brain is starting to, the slow cogs are starting to like go. And walking or ski, for me, cross country skiing is a great time. I get a lot of thinking done. So all of those things I think are sort of the magic moments.
Sure. And I think that physical activity it's very common with writers. There's something about that movement, like, I think it's just kind of getting that the cobwebs out, that movement just gets the thoughts moving.
Well, I know I think it's a good thing for writers to have some physical exercise, because we spend a lot of time sitting down, and I like to get outside and into the woods and have some space to think and breathe and move every day.
And are you located in northern Minnesota? Is that right?
Yeah, I live in Duluth, which I love.
Lovely. Yes. And then did that landscape help give you some ideas for the Enchantment Lake series?
Oh yeah.
Uh-huh.
Well, I started those stories. Enchantment Lake is a series of mysteries that take place at a northern Minnesota lake where there's cabins and, all the lake life. And I started writing them sort of like when you go to the cabin and you do a crossword puzzle, or not a crossword puzzle, a jigsaw puzzle, and you leave it lying there on the table. And when you go back to the cabin, there it is, and you keep working on it. The first mystery the first one called Enchantment Lake, I worked on it like a jigsaw puzzle at our cabin, usually in the summer, for like 10 years. Like a really long time. And it wasn't the only thing I was doing. That's what I mean. It was sort of like a jigsaw puzzle where you just kind of sit down and you kind of like, well, now what happens? So yeah, it was inspired. It actually started because of a road issue. We had kind of a twisty, bumpy, dusty, rutted road, or we did. And the county was going to come in and pave it and straighten it and make it 55 miles an hour, whatever. And there was a big fight among all the, and the funny thing about this is that they're mostly Lutheran pastors that live along this lake shore. And so, they're really nice people. But oh my gosh, this thing set off a thing. And I started thinking, I wonder what would happen if people started killing each other over this. And so that's kind of where I started with the mystery. And then, of course, as stories do, it just took its own course and veered off into other realms. But that was what got it started.
Yeah. Yeah, it's great to get those ideas, just from the landscapes that are around you. And I think that's also something very common to writers.
Well, it was really kind of fun to do because I have been writing historical fiction. So I have been writing about a 19th century Japanese boy, the first person to come to America in Heart of a Samurai, and then a Norwegian boy in World War II. And so I was all over the world. Latest one is in France. And so it requires lots and lots of research, just tons of research to do these, especially those Japanese stories. And so I thought, well, it would be nice to not have to do that.
Yes.
Just write about something I know. But what's interesting about it is I still have to do research. And the way another thing about my process is because I do a lot of research, even with the mysteries that are, based in northern Minnesota, which I know well. I don't do a ton of research ahead of time because what I do is I research as I'm writing because I don't know what I need to know until I need to know it. And if I know too much, I want to cram it all in there because it's all so interesting. And so I have the urge to put that info into my story, but maybe it doesn't, it's not the thing that serves the story. So that's kind of my method of research. I do some research, of course, so I know something about what I'm writing about, but then as I'm writing, I do most of it. I don't know. I forgot what I was going to say about that, but oh yeah, it's a great cure for writer's block. Research, I think. For me, if I ever get just stuck and I don't know, where to go, what to do, what happens next, whatever, just things get doldrummy, I just stop and do research. And always there's something that just goes, here's the scene, or here's a character, or here's a snippet of dialogue, or whatever, to get me going again. So I do appreciate research for a lot of reasons.
Yeah, sure.
That's one of them.
Yeah. Was an interest in history something that you grew up with? I mean, it sounds like you really like research. So
no. No, it's really funny because after Heart of a Samurai came out, I got asked, well, have you always been interested in history? And I was like, or the other question was, why did you want to write historical fiction? And I was like, oh, is that what it is? I mean, I didn't even know. I just wanted to tell this story. And no, in high school, I hated history because it was dates and names.
Yeah.
And I can't keep a date. I can't even remember my kids' birthdays, dates just. So I was terrible at it. And, I didn't. it wasn't interesting. And it wasn't until I started writing it that I realized it's stories. History is stories, and they're fascinating stories. And I wish that's the way. I'm sure that nowadays that's
Yes.
the way history is taught.
Yes.
But I grew up in the rulers on the. I mean, that's a kind of. I shouldn't say this. I don't know, but. Uh, we had to memorize things.
Yep.
And that was sort of what some of the education, I had a good education, I'm not complaining, but that class was a lot of memorizing dates and names.
Yeah, a very traditional approach. And like you said, the stories, I mean, if more people realized at a younger age, gee, these amazing stories that come out of history, I think they would just be captivated. And so it sounds like you didn't know that you were writing historical fiction because you just wanted to write a good story. Like that was the story that grabbed you.
Yeah, that's right. I just sort of stumbled on this story of this boy and who came to America, who was the first Japanese person to come to America, and he just had so many adventures and just a crazy life and kind of an interesting ending. And I just thought, oh, this is such a great story, and why haven't I heard about him before? And so that those sorts of things are what drove me to write about it.
Sure. Margi, tell us a little bit about your writing journey. You and I have talked previously. You had mentioned to me that you had worked in theater for many years, but that you were always writing. But it really took a while, I think, until you were over 50 before you actually had books published. So what did that look like? All of those years when you were, working not exclusively on writing.
Well, I was writing, but I was writing for theater. So most of my grown-up life, I've been worked in theater, and I still do occasionally. I just wrote a short libretto for an opera company that did a virtual opera. So occasionally I still get my hand in there, but mostly now I'm writing books. But most of my life, I wrote and directed theater, starting in about kindergarten. When I didn't get the part I wanted in the kindergarten musical. And so I thought, well, if I wrote my own plays, then I could star in them. And so I didn't actually know how to write in kindergarten, but I knew how to make things up. And so I started making up plays right away when I was little like that. And my friends would be in them and we would perform for our parents and so on. And I did that through elementary school, and in high school, I wrote the homecoming skits. And then in college, I got involved in a touring children's theater company. And that was actually, it's sort of an interesting circle. Like there's been a big circle in my life, and I'm sure that happens to a lot of people, but in college, I took a children's literature course that I loved. And because of that course, I got involved with this theater company because they would bring to life children's stories or, little picture books and things. We would write scripts from them, and then we would tour around northern Minnesota and perform. And anyway, then I started a touring children's theater company after college, and a professional one. And then I got involved in not adult comedy, but for grown-ups, satire comedy companies. And I wasn't performing anymore. I was just writing and directing. So I've been writing my whole life. But then when I had kids and we started reading those books again, and I remembered my love for children's literature. And I think what happened is what Eudora Welty says happens, that writing comes from a superior devotion to reading. And reading those stories was like, you just wanted to try it. I wanted to try and see if I could do something like that. So that's really what inspired me to start to try to write books. I, should say that I did go to school. I went to graduate school to be a writer, as many of us do. First at the University of Iowa, where I was kind of in the JV writing workshop. And then I had the opportunity to go study with John Gardner at Binghamton University. And so I was there, but then the second year, beginning of the second year, he was killed in a motorcycle accident. And that just kind of, I don't know, novel writing just seemed too dangerous or something. So I went back to theater. I just ran back, it was like, ah! And I started doing theater again. So it was a long, journey, but yes, it was, I was in my 50s when I started, when my career kicked off with Heart of a Samurai. I had a picture book with a friend that I wrote before that, and another little collection of quotes and sayings and things that I edited with a friend. So I had a couple of little projects that had, kind of fits and starts before that. And stories in journals and magazines. Remember print magazines?
Oh yes, they're great.
And they used to publish fiction in them. Yeah. So I had a few of those things happen. But it was, I was in my 50s when Heart of a Samurai was published. And so don't worry, it's not too late for you, anybody.
And what I always have to remember too, it's not our timeline, I mean, there's kind of this big universe out there that kind of lets things happen when they're supposed to happen, right?
Yeah, and I actually think that's true. People have asked me that, and I said, I actually don't know if I could have done what I'm doing now when I was younger. And I so admire young people who have children at home and maybe jobs and things, and they still manage to write and produce novels. I think it's amazing, because I don't think I could have done it. And now I read or I heard somewhere that grit is something that increases in your life throughout and kind of hits its peak in your 70s. Yeah. And so, which is really interesting. And I look at my husband, who's just in his early 70s, and he has so much grit. He's out there chopping wood. He just work. And I actually think that for me, that is a major thing that I talk about when I talk about, if you want to write novels, you have to have some grit, because you have to stick to it, and you have to have enough faith that it'll all come together somehow.
Sure. Tell me about that first book and getting a book deal. I think that's also something that writers, young writers or people who are just starting out there. I mean, there's so many options, to get your book published. So what did that path look like for you?
Yeah. Well, from one of those earlier books that I mentioned, I had an agent, and she turned out to be a terrible agent. Like one of those stories, but she wasn't, and I had a manuscript. I had the Heart of a Samurai manuscript, and she was supposedly shopping it around. Well, she was shopping it around, but I got a lot of rejections. And then I went to an SCBWI conference in Minneapolis, and there was an agent speaking, and I thought, oh, I really like him. I like what he's saying. I wish he was my agent. And so, I raised my hand. I said, what if you already have an agent? Can you, and you want a different one? And he said, oh, that happens all the time, So I sent him the first page of Heart of a Samurai, and a little, again, this is back in the day when we sent paper in the mail. And a little postcard it said, I would like to see more, and a little box to check. No, thank you, with a little box to check. And it was self-addressed, was stamped. So you could just stick that in the mail. And he checked, I would like to see more. I also added that I had seen him at the conference and I liked what he had to say. So, if you go to a conference, use those contacts that you make to, because I think they pretty much will look at your thing, whatever you're sending, if you have been to a conference where they've been spoken.
Mm-hmm.
So I sent him the rest, and it did get more rejections. I don't know. I don't dwell on them. But eventually it didn't take a really long time, I don't think, after Steve got a hold of it and found a home. But there is kind of a funny story, because one editor was interested in it, but she said she didn't want anything in it that wasn't true, that didn't really happen. So I had to take the bullies out of the story, because I didn't have any I didn't know. I made them up, because there wasn't any historical mention. But I knew that this kid, because of who he was and everything else, would have encountered bullies. So I took them out, and then so they were not in there when my current editor got hold of it, and he said, "You need to have some bullies." And I just stuck them back. I just said, put those chapters back in and sent it back. And then afterwards I thought, oh no, he's going to think I write really fast.
Oh, yeah, right. Like, I can handle that problem in 2 minutes.
Just like that. Voila.
Yeah. Yeah. But isn't that, I mean, that's just such a good example of the writing and publishing industry, right? One agent, one editor can say this, and then the next one says this. And it really is, I mean, of course it's about talent, but it's really about finding that match, like that person who just really understands what you're trying to do.
Right. I should have mentioned that so I took the bullies out and sent it back to that first editor, and she said, there's just not enough conflict. So, yeah, you are right. It just, don't give up, if you're sending things out, because and the other thing I should mention is that I was always revising the whole time. I didn't ever just turn it around. I mean, they say to do that, put in an envelope and send. I would open it, I would read it again, I would change things. I was revising and revising. So really, seriously, by the time it was bought, it was a much different manuscript than early days.
Sure. And pretty polished too, like you said, it didn't really take too long. I mean, I'd imagine what you were sending out there was pretty polished.
Oh yeah. I mean, it had been out a lot with the previous agent. So it's not like it was, well, I don't know if it'd been out a lot. She said it had. It had been out and about and rejected. So if I was ever fortunate enough to get comments from an editor, I would definitely take those into consideration and go and look at those places in the manuscript and see whether I could spiff that up.
Sure. And your Enchantment Lake books are with the University of Minnesota Press, correct?
Yes.
Which is kind of a different beast in that there you're dealing directly with the editor yourself, right?
Well, I'm always dealing with the editor.
Yeah.
At each of the houses that I've published with, I deal directly with an editor. They're all the editors are very different. They have very different approaches. They're all very wise people, and I appreciate I so appreciate having an editor. I can't even imagine, what things would look like without them. But it is different. It's a smaller house. So things maybe move a little bit faster. And but I still, have a relationship with the editor, and then there's still copy editing and proofreading and everything else, like everywhere. So,
Sure.
uh, you know, it's
Yeah.
similar.
Yeah. And you mentioned conferences, and I think the one that you mentioned, that acronym, it's the Society for Children's Book Authors and Illustrators. Did I get that right? The SCG.
SCBWI, Society for Children's Book Writers and Illustrators.
Yes, yes.
Yes, and if people are writing for kids and haven't joined that, they should join that right away.
Yeah, and just talk a little bit about that. I mean, that's a way to network. Going to the conference is a way to network. I mean, how important is that for writers?
Well, I think when you're starting out, it's a really, really good way to learn a lot and to meet people, to get the chance to hear from editors and agents and other writers, and just to meet them and be able to talk to them, or to have some connection. So I think, yeah, I do recommend that for people who are getting into the world. Can learn a lot that way.
Sure. Any other tips? A lot of people want to write. I mean, I meet people all the time, who say either they want to write, or they have an idea, or maybe they've started to write. But the number of books they get published versus the number of people who want to write, like the number of books is quite smaller than the number of people who want to write. So what advice do you have for people who want to get published? Like, what's kind of the secret to actually getting your book out there published and into the hands of readers?
Well, I wish I knew the secret to
Yes,
it.
it would be great.
I would be very popular indeed. It's persistence is key, probably, and networking as well, and writing a good book. It's kind of important. I don't know. I mean, no, it's a combination of persistence, having a good piece of work in your hand, luck, timing, and just keeping the faith, But a couple things popped into my head there while I was rambling, because I'm like, I don't know the answer to this. But one thing I do want to say to people is that it's getting published is a thrill, and thrills are short-lived. Like it feels great for a minute, and by a minute I mean in the scope of your lifetime, it's a minute, and then the reality sets in. You're not famous. You didn't make a lot of money, because it's very unusual to get rich from writing, and it's even unusual to be able to make a living from it. So, and a lot of children's book writers make their living from school visits and appearances and things like that, more than their royalties even. And so you have to keep that in mind. So the reason you should know why you want to get published and why you want to write. And I keep some little notes by my desk, and one of them is something that Adam Gopnik said at a part of his commencement address. And I love to just read it occasionally because it's so true. So he talks about the difference between invisibility and obscurity. And he says, we are all obscure by the standards of the greatest accomplishments that have ever been, all obscure in the eyes of eternity. But the moment we make something, write a song, dig a garden, draw a picture, write a poem, our invisibility ends. So make art, take chances, delight in the act of making for its own sake, since all the other acts that follow, success, applause, failure, turn out to be arbitrary and unfair in ways that the act itself is not. And so I have to read that to myself sometimes, because there is definitely an arbitrariness and an unfairness to publishing that there isn't to writing. Writing is its own reward. And you should definitely feel the joy. I mean, there's a lot of pain too. But if all you're feeling is pain when you're writing, don't do it. Seriously. That sounds horrible. So it just, I guess what I'm saying is that you might as well be enjoying what you're doing, because everything else is probably not going to turn out as great as you can imagine in your head it is.
You talked about that you have to write a good book. I mean, that's all part of it. You know, if you eventually want to get something published, how do you know when you have a good book? Like when you're writing, I mean, where, you know, like what is that? Like, how do you know your story is good?
That can be a challenge. And when I was saying earlier that the way I find the magic is by writing a lot of blah, 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 just junk. And then, you know, I mean, I'm not trying to write junk. I'm trying to write good things, but it just la, la, la. And then something clicks and then I'm kind of in. And I might be in for 5 minutes. I might be in for a half an hour. But, you know, you just have to take it when you get there. But how do you know which the junk is and what is the good thing? And that's what, I don't know, was it Hemingway who said you have to have a built-in, you know, crap
Yes.
detector.
Yes.
Like you need to know when what you're writing is no good. Mm-hmm. And it's not always easy. For me, a lot of it is how painful was it to write this, or how much fun was it? And if it was fun, it's or rewarding, or feels good, or I just know it's good, then that's probably good. And if it was like, just get through this chapter, that's probably the way your reader's going to feel too.
Yeah. For sure.
Just get through this.
Yeah. Do you have a writing group? I mean, do you have other people who are reading your work in progress who can also help you, you know, say that this is working or this isn't working?
Yeah, a writing group is great. I really recommend finding people who are on the journey like you are, for support and for friendship and for help. And yes, I get a lot of help from a writers group that I'm part of. Yeah, I can't say enough good things about having a group like that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very difficult to write in a silo, because I mean, it's just hard to judge your own work, you know?
Yeah, it really helps to have somebody else's eyes on it, and especially somebody who knows, you know, what they're doing. Somebody else. But I mean, you know, pretty much anybody can say, well, I kind of, my mind drifted during this part, and you don't want your reader's mind drifting. So look at that, you know?
Yeah, precisely. You do a lot of public events, or at least you had done a lot of public events, and you do a lot of school events, and you're working with young kids, which must be just a delightful audience. I mean, kids have to be so fun. What are some? Can you think of some just crazy or just funny things that you've been asked by these kids that you present to?
Well, one of the one of the very first school visits I ever did, at right after Heart of a Samurai came out, and I was in California, and I went to a school completely unprepared. I had this publicist who like, hey, you want to go to a school tomorrow? Anyway, I went there, and I was looking forward to the questions, and somebody raised their hand and said, is that your real hair color? So that one always stuck with me.
Yeah.
I also had same, early days. I had a little boy raise his hand and say, are you being considered? I hear you're being considered for the Nobel Prize.
Oh my goodness. Well then.
He meant the Newbery.
Oh,
but that was like, okay, great.
yeah. Maybe he had it in somewhere,
But one of the coolest thing that happened wasn't exactly a question, but I was doing a book launch at Wild Rumpus for West of the Moon, and a woman, well, first I have to explain, West of the Moon was inspired by my great-great-grandmother's diary that she kept as she emigrated from Norway in 1851. And on the sailing ship that they took to get here, she hired a maid, a young girl who was traveling all alone, had no family, didn't have anyone to meet, didn't have anywhere to go. And my great-great-grandmother, who didn't actually need a maid, hired her. And I think just make sure she was going to be okay, and I ended up writing West of the Moon about the maid's journey, not my grandmother, as I thought I was when I started. So at the end of my little talk, a woman came up to me and said, I am the great-great-granddaughter of the maid your great-great-grandmother hired.
so cool.
And it just was so, it just brought home to me the power of stories to bring us together.
Right. That would be just such an amazing connection to be a part of.
Yeah, it really was quite remarkable. She had pictures of her, and I'd never seen this person. Wow. And she said, well, I'm hoping to find out more about her from your book. And I was like, oh, you're not gonna find out anything real, because it's a completely fictional story in the sense of her journey. Mm-hmm. But although I used a lot of details from my great-great-grandmother's diary about ship life and what it was like in Norway at that time and so on.
Sure. Yeah, that just seems like such a neat happenstance. How fun. We'll wrap up here, just a few more minutes left, but I'm just curious, this kind of goes back to maybe the routine question, but obviously you do things other than write. So how are you balancing everything else, that is part of your life with writing? Like, how does that work for you?
Well, that is really tricky, isn't it?
Yeah.
That is one of the trickiest parts of writing. And I find it really hard, less hard right now because being stuck at home, but it can get really bumpy. But I have another little quote that I keep by my desk from my mentor at Binghamton University, who, when I went to visit him, I was at graduate school, so I was studying English literature and everything else, but I was also taking this writing workshop from him. And I went to his office and he said, well, I hope you're not going to any of your other classes. And it stuck with me. And I realized he had me pinned. I always been a good student. I do my work. I, will scramble to get all my assignments done and study for the test and everything. And what he was in fact telling me was, if you're going to write novels, that's what you're going to do. And you can't go to all your other classes at the same time. And I find that to be true. I just, and so I have to remind myself, just don't go to your other classes. This is what you're doing. You have to put it as a priority and let things go.
Mm-hmm. I like that. I like it. I like it in terms of don't go to other classes. Yeah. I'll remember that. I mean, I think, a lot of writers, they like to enjoy life. They like to say yes to a lot of things and have experiences. It's those experiences that really help us with our writing. So it's just hard to sometimes figure out, okay, when I really need to stop doing these things and actually just start writing.
Right. Well, I still feel like you need to have a life. And it shouldn't just all be writing. So I do, in normal times, I would do things with friends and go out and, have dinner parties and everything else, and certainly get outside every day and do something like that. But I think other, like house cleaning, you can let that go.
Oh, yes, I do know this tip.
Just things that you think you need, I have a little writing house. I guess we don't really have enough time. So I was going to show a few pictures, but I go out to my little writing house and then the rest of the world falls away. I'm not there now because it doesn't have great internet, but it's a great way to separate yourself from the laundry, the dishes, the dirty closets, the floors, and everything that, especially as women, we have our minds on all the time. What's for dinner? Do I have the right, do I need groceries? All those things that just are going all the time. So it's really nice that I have that little separate space, and that does not intrude there. None of it exists when I'm out there.
Yeah.
So that's one way I keep separate from those things.
And I think that's the key, even if you're in a little apartment, I think there's always a way you can just create that dedicated space to your writing.
Yeah, you just need to, it's a mental space more than anything.
Yes, that's a good point. Well, thank you so much, Margi. We'll wrap up here so people can go about their day enjoying the other parts of the festival. And I just want to remind people that they can go to the Deep Valley Book Festival website and find out more about you, Margi, and all of the other authors that are taking part of the festival. So you can find out more about your books if they go to our website or your website. What's your website again, Margi?
MargiPreus.com.
So just your name.com. So people can find out all about you and find out where to order your books, right?
Sure. Yep.
Yeah, good. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time today. Thank you for giving us all sorts of great insights into the writing life.
Oh, thanks for having me. It was fun chatting with you.
Yes, of course. I had a good time. Thanks, Margi.
Okay.